Dr. Gumbo's presentation is really the focus of the day, but since we're both in the same program here at AISA, we thought it's a good idea to work together in this way. And because our research interests are also quite similar, we thought that it's a nice idea if I give this sort of broad introductory presentation, just to sort of ease him into his presentation and just to ease you into the into what we'll be talking about today. So what we'll be talking about and what he'll be talking about is the topic of sustainable cities in Africa. Okay. Now, I know that in the past, people we've had many discussions about it, and people have told me, why this revised, over focus to a certain extent, in some cases on urbanization and on cities in Africa. Given the history, and Africa has always been a rural continent and has always been a continent of rural communities. Well, friends and colleagues, the picture is changing, and it's changing very fast. We're not saying don't focus on rural communities and rural problems. Okay, hear us correctly. We're not saying that. We're just saying that the picture of cities are changing, and it's changing very, very fast. And it is the speed at which the continent is urbanizing, which are creating headaches for governments and city municipalities, etc. So first thing, the picture is changing. It's happening very fast, and with the urbanization, there's obviously a lot of challenges that comes with it. Okay, and the challenges are becoming urban as well. So challenges that might have earlier been perceived as only being rural challenges are now also becoming urban challenges. So in light of, I'm not going to talk too much about the Millennium Development Goals in the United Nations. We all know that quite well, and I assume that most of us are familiar with that. So let's start with 2015 and what's happening after 2015. Okay, and the United Nations themselves and other scholars who started to think about post 2015 and what could happen in terms of global development highlighted those 6 challenges as key challenges for sustainable development and key risks to sustainable development after 2015. Okay. Now those 3 are all. Those 6, I'm getting to 3 now. Those 6 are all, to a certain extent, very interrelated. And if you would place them in the context of cities, they will all be very relevant in the context of cities and in the context of how cities are changing. And we'll get to that a bit later. Because so many people are living in cities now, those challenges are becoming so closely interrelated that in a city you need to deal with all of that. You need to deal with food, you need to deal with inequalities, you need to deal with financial systems and with energy and with climate change. Okay, so those 6 challenges. This picture, some of you might have seen, and that's the very basic, true, that's like the Bible verse of sustainable development, the 3 pillars of sustainable development: economic, social, and environmental. Okay, and those 6 challenges all are linked in some sort of way to that picture and those 3 pillars. So those 6 risks or challenges, can be seen as sort of mega trends in global development and global challenges to sustainable development. And as we said, we need to understand how they work together. We need to understand how they function together. We need to understand how they link up with each other. And because those challenges cut across so many sectors, we need to look at approaches that are interdisciplinary and multidisciplinary, and look at very holistic pictures of trying to answer these new and upcoming questions. You can't do it with a single view. You need to have a much broader and much bigger picture in your mind when you do that. Right, now, cities, urbanization. Why are we talking about cities? As we said, we're not denying rural issues, and we're not denying rural poverty, but in the past 10 years, there's been renewed interest. And what is happening with this interest is, and as we said, is that the picture is changing so fast that people don't know what to make of it. And they don't know how to deal with this picture of this fast and rapid growing urban societies and communities. So whatever we might have thought in terms of theories of development, in terms of urban geography, in terms of urban planning, gets challenged. And the ideas that we might have had gets challenged because the environment and the societies are changing so fast. It's also very difficult to. There's a nice book that I picked up 2 years ago, just after it was released, called African Cities. Trying to just pick up that book. Yeah, it's if you are really interested and you want to possibly look at it at some point, it's a nice book. It's called African Cities: Alternative Visions of Urban Theory and Practice. Garth Myers, 2011. Okay, and he says that because cities are changing so fast and because they are so diverse and so complex, that we can't speak of one idea of an African city. Okay, you can't have that. And so we need to start thinking inward, and we need to start using African urban concepts and African ideas and African ways of thinking to look back and to reflect on the theories and practices that exist. For the simple reason that those theories and practices, most of them originated in Europe, in North America, the western part of, so-called western part of the world. So we need to try and change that by using our African understandings, our African ideas, African urban concepts, to come up with revised ideas of how do we talk about cities, how do we think about cities in Africa, how do we discuss cities in Africa, and how do we write about cities in Africa. Okay, so just a quick sketch that comes from the UN Habitat State of African Cities 2010 report. Very comprehensive report, very well written, very in depth, very comprehensive. These projections are based on the World Urban Predictions of 2009. The 2011 revised editions are out. I just used the 2009 picture because I thought it was a nicer graph. But the picture in terms of numbers, it doesn't change that much from between the 2009 and the 2011 revised versions. So the fact of the matter is, we were talking about how fast it's changing, and there you have it. It's changing, and it's changing very, very fast. Just in numbers, okay, so 2009, Africa's population for the first time went above the 1 billion mark. Almost 40% of that 4 years ago were really living in urban areas. Now, if those current growth rates continues, it could be around 1 billion of the total population of Africa in 27 years from now in urban areas. 37 years from now, it could be around 60% of an expected total continental population of 2 billion. So we can't ignore it. Okay, we have to we can't just say, okay, fine, cities are growing, and we have to think about it, and governments must think about it, municipalities must think about it. It needs to become part of public policy. It needs to become part of how governments think about the delivery of services in cities, how they think about housing in cities, how they think about the distribution of wealth in cities. Okay, and as we said, it's a complex issue, it's a multidimensional issue, and therefore we need to look at integrated and coordinated approaches to dealing with it. Right, now, key challenges. Okay, so what I thought I'd do now for the last few slides, and as I said, I'm not the headline act. Trinos is, so I just thought it would be nice to look at some of the key challenges and also some of the key success factors that comes out of literature in terms of what could possibly be needed for building sustainable cities and building sustainable communities in cities and making the transition sustainable. Okay, lack of economic dynamism. Okay, so the basic idea that because this transition is happening so quickly that there's not enough economic dynamics. Okay, so towns and cities cannot effectively support this fast growing population. It's basically as simple as that. And that, once again, if you think about the first slide I had with the 6 challenges and the 3 pillars of sustainable development, links up directly with the economic pillar of sustainable development. Governance failures. It's you know, I just think that cities are just growing too fast, and governments. It's almost like it's something that snuck up onto governments overnight. I think, you know, it's governments are not, you know, were not necessarily prepared for it. They were not necessarily prepared for the speed and the rate at which it would take place. So I mean, failures is the word used in literature. It might be perceived as a strong word, but the fact of the matter is that it provides new challenges to governments and to how governments think about cities. The next point, we don't have to say too much about. If you look at, for example, South African inner city areas and how that has degraded over the years, that's a direct result of urbanization and the lower services. Service protests, to a certain extent, you know, you tend to start to see them more in cities, okay? And some of the last service protests we've had in South Africa were about changing a municipality to a metro municipality, okay? So because people think if you're changing it to a metro municipality, you're automatically going to get better services, you're automatically going to get better access to services, better infrastructure, better everything, okay? That seemingly is not the case, and so that's one of the big reasons for for protests. Land in cities, we know, is an issue, and yeah, that's. I don't really have to say more. I mean, you open up your eyes and you can see it around you. Yeah. Now, poverty. Okay. The big thing about urbanization is that poverty is also becoming urban. Poverty used to be, you know, it's when I was at university and in development studies textbooks, you learn that poverty is a rural issue, and that's what you learn. And there's nothing wrong with it. There's really nothing wrong with it. But once again, the picture is changing. Poverty is becoming urban as well, and the social breakdown idea comes from the fact that household structures are changing as well, okay? And sometimes it changes for the negative in cities, okay? That's not necessarily a city problem. It's a problem of how people move between rural and cities, and the mindset changes that happens when that takes place, okay? But it's important to take note of that. And the biggest consequence of all of that is the creation of urban divides and urban inequality, okay? Because the more people start coming to cities and the more they keep on coming to cities, they've got no guarantee that, people think that it's going to be better, it's going to be, economically a better situation than where they came from, but there's no guarantee. If the city can't cope with the number of people, there's really no guarantee. And if the city can't cope, the divides start getting bigger. The latest statistics by UN Habitat is 60% of urban residents in Africa in slums. Just a thought for the back of your head. And linked to the slums is the informal side of cities, okay? The informality. Why does informality take place? Informality happens when people can't access the services and the infrastructure that the city is providing them with, okay? Or if it's not adequate enough, okay? Then what do we get? We get informality. We get informal systems. Okay, and informal systems has got dynamics of its own. It's got problems of its own. Once again, we can't deny it. We just have to embrace it, and we have to learn how to deal with it sustainably. Okay, because the nature of African cities is, at the moment, currently, maybe in years to come it will change. But currently, if you look at African cities, the informality is there, and it's not going to go away. Okay, so we need to learn how to deal with it, and learn how to understand it, and learn how to understand the complexities of the informal side of cities, okay? And not just looking at the formal side, because when people see urbanization, they see big buildings, they see nice buildings, they see clean streets, and that's to a certain extent the picture the world creates, in our own minds of what a good city should look like, okay? But in Africa, that's not the case. So the informality aspect is also very important. And I think at Streiner's will also touch quite a bit on that when he gives his presentation. Now, 3 questions, and I'm going to give you a nice definition now of the sustainable resource efficient, that part of the sentence. So, okay, how do we make this transition, okay, to sustainable cities and resource efficient cities, okay, and resource efficient and sustainable urban development, okay? Second question, in this whole transition that we've spoken about for the past few minutes, what are the barriers and the opportunities that exist? And thirdly, how do we make sure that sustainability and that development is pro-poor? It has to be pro-poor at all times. Okay, the urban poor has to be part of all these debates, especially in the developing country context, especially in the African context, and also in the South African context. Now, there's a definition. Okay, that comes from the UNEP, Sustainable Resource Efficient Cities. Okay, make it happen. Sustainable Resource Efficient Cities, making it happen. It's a good report to read. Okay, that's the definition they give. Okay, so a sustainable resource efficient city can be defined as a city that is significantly decoupled from resource exploitation and ecological impacts, and is socio-economically and ecologically sustainable in the long term. Okay. Then a few success factors identified for what we need to think about when we want to think about creating sustainable resource efficient cities. Okay. First, integration. Okay, integration we've spoken about. Integration, very broad word, but it's broadly put there for a reason, because it needs to be integrated in all possible spheres. When it comes to government, when it comes to civil society and community organizations and how they work with each other, when it comes to the divide between rich and poor, when it comes to the divide between formal and informal, it needs to be integrated in all those spheres. Okay, and the urban divides we spoke about, and that is something. It's not just in South Africa, unfortunately, it's not just an urban issue. It's a countrywide issue. Okay, the divide. So we need to speak about that. And we live in a democratic nation and a democratic country, a democratic system. So governments cannot make any decisions without getting the inputs of their population and their people that they work with. And the planning part becomes important because of how cities are growing, and you need to understand how they're growing and where they're growing. The city of Tshwane, for example, is geographically a very big area. Okay, it's I think north to south it's something like 55 kilometers or 50. It's a big geographical area, and it's not such a strange phenomenon that metropolitan areas are such big areas. Okay, so we need to look at how we smartly design and plan the spaces that we work with, and if you look at the whole picture of the municipality, how you work with that whole space. We spoke about finance, and once again linked to the economic side of the 3 pillars of sustainable development. Technology and skills development, something our government focuses on a lot. And then the last thing is innovation. China's always speaking a lot about innovation as well. So, by stimulating environment, we mean that there needs to be policies in place that can, create spaces for innovation to take place in a good way. Linked to all of this effective urban management, something that Trinos will also speak, much more in depth, is the synergy between waste and recycling, and also water and sanitation. Okay, and then obviously that is once again linked to the impacts of climate change and the vulnerability of a city to climate change. There's a phenomenon called the heated city island effect. Okay, and the idea is that because of how built up the environment in a city is, okay, and the density of buildings, the density of people, that temperatures can rise or can differ up to about 10 degrees Celsius between that specific area and other areas. Okay, and if that happens, obviously you need more cooling, so you need more energy, and energy and water demands just go up. And if the demands go up, what happens? The prices go up. Okay, we have to pay more for electricity. We all feel it at the moment, and we're still going to, according to ESCOM, feel it for quite a few years. So that's so you need to look at the interaction between that, and then policy frameworks, always important. You need solid, good, well-designed, well-thought-out policies in place. Last thing, which I'm going to conclude with, which to a certain extent captures a lot of what I said, is once again just including the urban poor. Okay, poverty is becoming urban. It's becoming urban very fast, and you cannot put the urban poor aside. You need to include and integrate the urban poor into all planning policies when it comes to sustainable urban development. Community organizations and networks become important, once again, especially when it comes to the urban poor. And then lastly, once again linked to the poor and the urban poor, working with that gap between the very top and the very bottom, okay, and bridging those divides. So with those 3 points of a possible sustainable agenda for African cities, I'm going to conclude, and hopefully it gave you just a good overview picture of the background of what Trinos will be talking about. You'll be going into much more depth with regard to innovation, waste management, recycling, and the linkages between those. So I hope I didn't bore you. I hope you found it interesting. I hope you found it a good background to Trinos' presentation. Trinos.